Good afternoon, or good morning, actually. This is a presentation with the title, It Can Happen to You, Surviving a Water Disaster. I am Virginia Weygandt, Director of Collections for the Clark County Historical Society, and this is our tale of woe.
And I'm Natalie Fritz, Curator of Library and Archives for the Clark County Historical Society. And while we have this slide up, I'll introduce you to our building. Tonight you're going to hear about the part of our building on our east end that was affected by the water disaster. But the east end of the building, we have collections on the basement, first, second, and third floors. And we have on the west end of the building is where you can find our museum. And we have an extended building over here where we have more museum. So just to give you a little bit about us. And Virginia is going to start with our story.
There are several things that really helped our ability to meet this water disaster. And so I've titled this The Past is Prelude. I'm going to talk to you about 4 different things. One was the REPP that we went through in 2008. Previous disasters that we have experienced from 2003 to 2019, a collection survey that was done by my graduate school class, and the Ohio History Fund grant inventory. The REPP, which is a risk evaluation and planning program, was developed by Heritage Preservation with a national leadership grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The REPP grant offered a professional evaluation of the risks, both natural and man-made, to collections, priorities for mitigating those risks, and assistance in creating or updating an emergency plan. The REPP was developed to address issues that were discovered in the first ever comprehensive national survey of the condition and preservation needs of the nation's heritage collections housed in libraries, museums, historic sites, archives, arboretum, and zoos, to name just a few. The 2004 Heritage Health Index, which was the end result, written analysis, revealed that America's heritage institutions lacked some basic things: emergency plans, collection care plans, condition reports, finding aids and catalogs, inventories, and environmental controls. We were one of 5 museums in Ohio that received the grant, and as we have previously reported in other OHA conferences, we learned that our highest risk factor, at a risk factor of 12, was for water pipe leaks. One of the benefits of the adaptive reuse of a historic building is that beautiful architectural buildings can be saved and repurposed for the enjoyment of the public. Of course, there is a downside, which we have experienced in our gorgeous former City Hall and Marketplace, which is that there have been piecemeal repairs done over the years, which have put our collections at risk. Beginning in 2003, we've had pipe bursts and leaks all over the building, from basement to attic and east to west end. We became, as you can see by the pictures, very adept at moving boxes, tenting shelves with plastic sheeting, and airing collections wherever we could. But we'll be honest, nothing prepared us for the scale of water disaster of 2019. In preparation for our grant inventory project, which again you may have heard about before, we began to address the issues of the current condition, location, and housing needs of our objects. I enlisted my artifact preservation graduate class to conduct a collection survey, analyze their results, and submit written reports. The format for the survey audit was based upon one from Susan Keene's most excellent book, Managing Conservation in Museums. Each group had 2 students. They were assigned an area or a room on the 2nd floor of the Heritage Center. They were told not to rebox, renumber, or reorganize anything they found, just to audit the objects. And you can see what those class survey audits looked like. Estimate what it would take to house and properly store the objects, and conduct pH tests on the existing boxes. The results gave us an excellent overview of the condition of the objects, the extent and types of unboxed objects, the the extent of unnumbered objects, which was a whole lot higher than I expected, and an estimate of the materials necessary to properly house our collections. We used that information in our request for funding. The Ohio History Fund grant, which we applied for in 2012 and received in 2013, we were one of the first of 11 historical societies that year to receive Ohio History Fund grant for a collections management improvement project. That funded project was a direct result of the final recommendations of the previously mentioned REPP report that advised us that we should seek grant funding so that all collections can be inventoried and cataloged to establish a collection priority and preservation status. And as you remember, if you were in our session and previously heard from us, the cataloging project created an item level inventory by room, rank, box, and shelf, and a condition report of our collections, allowing staff to set priorities for rescue and protection during a disaster.
So to give you an idea of where that put us in the beginning of 2019, we were about 6 years into plugging along on this inventory. We completed what we had done as part of the grant, and then we continued to move from room to room to continue our knowing by item level what we had on each box. So you can imagine how devastated it felt when we walked in on we found out late in the evening on April 25th, 2019, a pipe had burst on the third floor archives and an area between our walls at the Heritage Center. And it sent water, the pipe fell and burst and sent water cascading through the east end of the building. And that upended all of the work that we had spent the past 6 years doing. So we had a disaster plan, as some of you may have. And it's one thing to know your plan. It's another thing to walk into a situation such as this, which is obviously from the outset much larger and much worse than anything you could have imagined. I received the call at home at about 11:30 from my boss and realized, okay, he's calling very late. This can't be good. And he could barely talk. And he said, I think you just may want to get down here. So this is me at about the picture I took up just before midnight. That's my boss walking down the hall. You can see the water at his feet. We had some good response time from the local fire department, who came and jumped right into action, realized what was going on, and started pushing water out along the floor and down the hall and out of the way as quickly as they could. They also put buckets in place, great big trash cans that not only gave us an idea of the extent of how much water had fallen in that short period of time, but it also helped to gather some of that water. So it was very helpful to us that they were able to do that, and they were able to tarp off some areas quickly as well. Those first few hours, Virginia jumped right into action to figure out where our critical risk was. The first task was to prioritize the collections rooms according to the degree of water damage. We have 7 rooms in that hallway, and rooms 3, 4, and 5 got the bulk of the water damage. 6 and 7 had minimal damage, so we didn't worry so much about those. Rooms 1 and 2, where Casey and Virginia have their offices, did have a lot of water damage, but they didn't have as much collections or any other things in that area, so they were a lower priority. So we had them marked, and that could let staff and volunteers know which rooms to get into first. Rooms, these are some of the other rooms. Although there might have been minimally affected in rooms 5 and 6, there was still damage to the lower shelves. You can see in these photos, brick dust and dirt are everywhere throughout all of the rooms. And the water damage stretched all the way throughout that hallway where we have our collections rooms out into the rotating gallery, which is the room shown here. And it went the other direction into our administrative offices and down the hallway towards where our educator has her office. So we didn't know at this point that we were going to end up having to move everything. That first night, we just jumped right into, let's get out the things that are very obviously water damaged first. Even though this room, our rotating gallery, had clear water in the room. We knew that it stopped about halfway through the room. So we jumped into action, setting up tables where we could. We have tables stored in the walls along the sides of the room. So we pulled out what we could. And what was saved from serious damage, what they put out humidifiers. We put in a call and they brought out to start pumping the water out and put out humidifiers. So you can see we have boxes laid out to start drying, and then we moved on to getting stuff out of the boxes. You can see here, this room had still been set up for a classroom, a class activity that had been there the previous day. And rather than stack the chairs, which I thought later, why didn't we stack the chairs? We used the chairs. We used what we had immediately in front of us, which is what a lot of people may encounter in a disaster, to be able to use what they have for them. So we set up tables here, there, and everywhere, and you can see underneath the tables here, we had, as we started to open up the boxes that had severe water damage, we would lay out the items to dry on the table and had the damaged boxes underneath. Also a picture from the first night, though the water has receded here, you can see the damage along the bottom boxes. And this showed us right off the bat the problem with the fact that some of our shelves are not uniformly spaced 6 inches up from the floor. So if they had had that, if they had all been properly spaced, we might not have had this damage to our lower shelves. So as you can see, every room had some sort of damage. This is Casey's office, where we have a lot of signage from previous temporary exhibits. And we've got our big scale printer for printing in-house exhibits, which was unfortunately damaged. So we've got all of that going on. And then out in the poor Virginia's office has this shelf where we have our handwritten accessions. So you can see those, the water was pouring directly down onto that shelf. So we got those out to get them to dry as quickly as we could and fan them out to facilitate drying. One of the problems we ran into, which we'll discuss more later, is we had to move collections multiple times throughout this to get in and out of spaces and clear spaces. So we had moved the binders here. They eventually got moved down to the second floor to another set of tables to dry. But workers that were working with us to do the restoration in different parts of the building had ended up tarping over the table where we had those binders stored. So if anyone knows that they would not dry properly that way, and we didn't realize it too late that them being tarped over had caused the pages to mold in a lot of the cases. So that was something we had to deal with later. We jumped so quickly into action, we were able to empty those rooms very, very quickly. This is, I believe, room 4. And room 5, they both had the ceiling coming down like that. And room 5, we had just managed to clear the room, got the last part out of there, and a great big chunk of the ceiling fell down. So we were under a major crunch, and we were worried, you know, about the collections, but also about ourselves, to make sure we wanted to keep our staff and volunteers safe. And then the plaster, you can't see it as well in this room, but in the later days, we could see it starting to bubble from the damage that had happened from the water. And as the artifacts left the room, we had our restoration crew, Reliant Restoration, come behind us just to take the shelves down as we went, so they could start getting the rooms apart. I had mentioned before that we did have a disaster plan, but on the day of, it amounted more to, we knew that there was a local restoration company called Reliant Restoration, and we put in a call to them, and they were there within an hour and a half to start pumping water out of the building and start on the work that needed to be done. So a lot of the carefully laid out people to call and everything that had been in our disaster plan, we didn't end up needing to use, because working with that one company, they had contractors to deal with a lot of the things. So that ended up working well for us. Virginia is going to talk a little bit more about where our collections ended up.
As Natalie has pointed out, our collections have ended up here, there, and everywhere. And one of the problems is we had to move them too frequently. What you see in this slide is how we tried to handle the problem of unpacking so many boxes. We had over 300 acid-free boxes that were completely destroyed by water. And so what we tried to do was keep the box list with the objects so that it would be not quite so difficult putting everything back together again. But unfortunately, as she mentioned, as we kept moving things around, some things did get separated from their collection or from their original box. We also knew that we needed to get things out of those wet boxes as quickly as possible because time was not on our side. Within 12 hours, photographic emulsions, books, and scrapbook bindings and papers begin to swell and cockle. Within 12 to 36 hours, wood swells, veneers pop, furniture joints become unstable. And within 48 to 72 hours, we knew we would have mold metal objects beginning to corrode, wet textiles that would begin to stretch, even fugitive dyes, which we actually did have happen. And of course, good old mold set in. So what we did was put collections everywhere, any place that there was a flat, dry surface, every nook, every cranny. And these are going to be the pictures then of where our collections ended up. This, of course, is our lobby. So we started unpacking there. It was, we used the rotating gallery. You saw a picture of that earlier. Well, this is almost at the end where we finally started taking shelving out of those rooms. Some went off-site and some we moved, or actually shoehorned into the gallery so that we could hold more objects. And then the rest of those shelving units were taken off-site. From there, we set things up. Actually, that's my office. It got boxed up and put out in the gallery with everything else that went in the gallery. And this is called the Noonan Gallery. As you can see, we have things that we've already taken out of boxes. They are on tables that have nice covers on them to help keep the artifacts clean and help them begin to dry. That happens to be the Frontier Theater. We actually would take a table, set it up, fill the boxes, or put the boxes on top, boxes underneath, set up another table, do the same thing, and literally back ourselves out of the room. So it was a very creative use of very small spaces. We put paintings in the lab underneath the counters so that we could keep them segregated. Yes, we did have to remove absolutely everything from the second floor collection storage area.
And the fact that we had to move absolutely everything was not something that dawned on at least me at the beginning. I know that first night, my thought was, okay, we know that we have bad damage in rooms 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's get them empty. And my thought was, you know, we'll get those rooms taken care of and then we'll put everything back and everything will be fine. It didn't dawn on me the extent of the water damage to the floor and the ceilings and everywhere all throughout that entire area, that everything was going to have to come out because everything was going to need to be replaced in those rooms. So I know that it was a little bit of as panicked as I felt the first week, moving quickly when I realized, oh, we have to move all of it. It was the feeling was much worse. A little bit into the second week of dealing with this is when we realized that the damage to the floor and the archives, although it had not come down on any of the items, it had gone across the floor under the wall where the pipe had broken. The damage to the floor was too great that they were going to need to replace the floor in the archives as well. Which meant we were going to have to move absolutely everything in the archives. So here we are trying to find room for everything throughout the building that we needed to move artifact wise. And then we realized we also had to move everything out of the archives as well. So our first plan was to move everything into the library. So we set up tables in the library area and used the top of the tables, underneath tables, the tops of every shelf, everything we could to stack as much as we could into the library area. So about half made it there. After we ran out of space, we found other areas where we could use stuff. This is an little used gallery on the west end of the building where we have a case there. There's a lot of textile boxes in there. These are oversized boxes and blueprints from the archives also in there, and then more archival collections under the table. And you can see a little bit of our tagging here. As we took stuff out, I tried the best I could to keep like items together and keep categories together. So as we moved our blueprints, we knew which style blueprints these were, which type of blueprints, so that we could put them back on the shelves eventually the way they had been. So we put up tables one at a time, would crawl underneath, put collections under there, and then put tables over top of that and keep moving, like just like we did with in the theater, and back ourselves out of the room. In the Crable gallery on the first floor, this is all collections on top of the table, artifact collections, but then underneath the tables is where we were able to store the archival collections. So each table we had labeled with an arrow pointing down as to which category was underneath that table, so we could keep those categories together. That ended up being helpful because even while we were closed, we were still getting research requests from outside. And I was still trying to keep up with our regular posting schedule as much as possible, of sending letters, pictures to the newspaper, and putting stuff on our various social media accounts. So it allowed me at least some access to things. If I needed to get put my hands on a certain collection, I could still possibly get to it. But we did rely a lot on stuff that had been previously scanned. Here you can see we temporarily made use of the museum. So the museum was closed for a month after this all happened so that we could use those spaces. So we've got newspapers out here and other collections from the archives that had ended up out in the museum area. We even ended up using the basement. So you can see more newspapers stacked down here. We had them on skids, and we had boxes on tables throughout the basement, which runs the length of our building. We realized very quickly that there was going to be some things that we absolutely could not have on site if we wanted to keep as much as we could on site. We decided that we found some offsite storage facility in town, and we determined that our probate records, which are also available on microfilm at the county offices, would be the best things to go, because we knew that they would still be accessible to any researchers, and we could just send them to another location if they needed to access them during this period. So those were stored on the third and second floor. So we started emptying those out and taking them over there. And that was over 500 boxes that went to that offsite facility. So then we're raising issues of degree of handling. So this was one handling. We took the boxes down here and stacked them, thinking that we were going to have some time. And of course, we have a little ice cream shop over here that the day we moved those boxes into their way, they came out and said, we actually need to get in there today. We have all of our ice coming, because they were going to be opening up in the next week or so. So we had just moved all of those boxes. We had to move them again and stack them somewhere else. So that's, again, two handling before they'd even left the building. There were some, here we're separating the good boxes from the bad boxes. You'd seen them under the table in a previous picture. Then we started to stack them together and mark them. You can see the black X's on them. We were keeping a tally of what size boxes we were needing to replace, so that we could, when we put in our order for replacement supplies, we knew exactly what we needed. And then we were able to get them out of the building. We had help from friends. For example, the Kettering Foundation, where I worked years ago, a friend of mine who still works there, had just moved a collection cross country. And these were the moving boxes that they had broken down, and they had offered, previously to anyone that needed them. And I remembered that and said, oh, do you still have those boxes? We could really use those. So we had some great temporary packing boxes that we could use for items to repack stuff. And then some of their old collections boxes, you can see they say Kettering Foundation on them. So when we've reused them, we've marked over so we don't get confused that those are not our collections. But it was very helpful to have that from our community. I also got some stuff from the Dayton Metro Library, was able to help us. But we continue to have help from Reliant Restoration. They were able to help us move heavy items and shelves and things like that as we started to put stuff back together. And we had great community help from board members, volunteers, their friends. This is one of our board members who called together all of his buddies to help us redo shelves in one of the areas, and they did a whole shelf building day with that. So while we're on this part about having volunteers help you get through this crisis, we want to remind people that when you're doing this, don't forget to feed and water your volunteers. anyone that's from the Springfield area knows that Schuler's Donuts can help get you through anything. So we had a board member who helped us keep us supplied with donuts. We tried to make sure we had plenty of bottled water on hand, and tried to make sure we stopped people to take breaks so that they could stay hydrated and stay fed. We've got friends from Wright State. Lisa Rickett came that first weekend to help. We pulled in spouses. Virginia's husband here is here helping. So we got all the help that we could get, and we very much appreciated it. And this is showing us towards the end of it, when we were emptying the very last table in that great big room. I'm taking down the table, and we were very excited, and you can see the room is empty now. So Virginia is going to talk a little bit about the process of putting it all back together.
So we did finally get it all put back together. Our reconstruction began with demolition of the ceilings and replacing the floors. Or actually it worked the other way around. They put in the floors because we had one contractor doing that. And then they decided to demolition the ceilings. So the new floors had to be covered so that debris that was falling down from the ceilings didn't damage the new floors. Now here you can see them working in my office. I had the same bubbling paint plaster problem. And so what the guys are doing is scraping that off the walls. It's still a disaster in my office, but things were coming along. One decision we made, which was really good, and be thinking in your disaster, what kinds of things you might want to correct. AASLH had a program called Chaos described as, yes, chaos and opportunity, for lack of a better term. So one decision we made was to absolutely reconfigure the shelves down the hallway because they never really worked in the first place and were always kind of difficult to maneuver around. So with doing that, we measured the shelves, we measured the space, we grafted everything on graph paper, just to make sure that we would have enough space and a good 3 feet or more between shelves so that we could get our carts in and out of there without the problems that we'd had previously. The other thing we did is, yes, we did put our shelving, our bottom shelves up 6 inches. We learned the hard way that 6 inches makes a real difference. With 3 inches of water on the floor, we would have avoided many of our problems if our last shelf on these units had been 6 inches above the floor. The other thing we looked at was the fact that the south side of the building, that's the south wall that you see there with the windows, has always had a problem. That's where our leaks have happened. That's where the ice jams and the gutters have happened. And so we decided to push back any shelving units by 1 foot or maybe 1.5 feet so that we wouldn't have to keep contending with problems from that south wall. And so here we are making it. We've got artifacts and boxes slowly beginning to return to the second floor areas. Now, because we had to wait almost 3 months for our supplies, which is another story you'll hear a little bit more about, we had to wrap a lot of our uniforms in oversized pieces in unbleached muslin and to use various sizes of brown acidic boxes. And so what you see here in room 3 and 4 is that we've got piles now of things wrapped in muslin. They are secure, and we tried as much as possible to wrap things from the same collection together. We talked about handling. Well, here's where we tried to put things back together as much as we could.
I'm going to jump in on this slide because this is a little bit about putting back together the archives. I had mentioned that we tried to sort everything by category. So whereas in the collections area, some of the shelves were taken out into the rotating gallery to be used to store stuff on site, and some of the shelves were taken completely off-site to our off-site storage, which meant they had to be carted across the building and taken down through the freight elevator and taken away. The prospect of being able to get put together shelves out of our archives was just not doable. We wouldn't have been able to get them down the elevator. We would have had to carry them down the stairs. It was just not something that we could do. So as we took apart the archives, they took down each shelf. So each shelf, the shelves were completely taken apart and stacked up along the walls with the uprights and everything. So when we started to put them back together, originally we had planned to try and do it ourselves with volunteers. The prospect to me was very daunting and scary. Figured it would take us forever. Luckily, the company we were working with came to us and said, you know, we have some workers that we can put on putting your shelves back together. So we took them up on that, and they started just building quickly. They built them to the specifications we gave them with 6 inches from the floor. And they started to put them back together, and we decided to go ahead and make all of the shelves as uniform as we could, which was a little bit better than we had previously had in the archives. We had various sizes of shelves and where the shelving was. So they put the shelves together in place where they were, and that is one thing that I realized later that was not the way we should have done it. We had the map of how we wanted things to go back together. I do wish that we had had the workers, as they got the shelves together, put them back in place where they belonged. So that was a lesson learned. So I'll let Virginia continue with.
So yes, by the time it was all put back together, we had new floors, new ceilings, new lighting. Yes, we did have to have new lighting because not only was there water in the old lighting, but we decided while we're upgrading, let's get decent LED lights down the hallway. We had blinds in the collections rooms, and in some places brand new shelving. So we are cleaned, we are scrubbed. Someone came through and said, gosh, that smells good. To put it back together, hopefully, so we can find things again, that is the goal, is that we want to make sure that we get back to the point where we know where every item is by shelf, by rank, by box, by tray, whatever it is. We've developed a system to unwrap each brown box or bundle, check everything for water damage, rebox in nice fresh boxes, and put a temporary label and a little tent, what we call a little tent. In other words, a little label, as you see sticking out, that says this box has been checked during phase 1. For boxes like these, our nice acid-free boxes that had no water damage, then everyone has been going through the box, again, double checking, make sure there's no problem, make sure that the contents and the box list match each other, and then put it all back together again. When all is said and done, there should be a nice tag that is initialed and a box list that is initialed, and pretty soon, or within a couple years, we will be ready to start our rechecking the inventory and checking our boxes.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the additional issues and pressures that we dealt with throughout this. So I talked a little bit about the fact that the records that had been in Virginia's office, our accession logs, the handwritten ones, had been water damaged and then tarped over, which led to molding. The only solution we had once we discovered that was that we knew we were going to have to scan and digitize and possibly reprint some of the stuff to dispose of those moldy originals. So that was something that we set aside to deal with later. And I'll talk about later, you know, we had some periods of downtime where we were kind of stuck on what we were able to do. Here we are again showing our rotating gallery. The company that we were working with, Reliant Restoration, was wonderful. They had wonderful contractors and workers. They specialize in dealing with disasters like this. They come in to help people with home water disasters or major building with companies, and they would relocate the furniture, appliances, and everything else during the water mitigation to deal with, to help rebuild. I don't think they were used to dealing with a place like us where, you know, I think they were used to just being somewhere where we would just go away and they would do their thing and move everything. But since we were a museum that they were dealing with, we knew that we had specifically the training in how to deal with the moving the items and artifacts. So we knew we couldn't just leave it to them to say, okay, you guys move everything. So that put, the pressure on us to get the stuff out quickly, and get it moved and to areas where it was safe and could be drying, so that they could move behind us to continue working. So in some cases, they were just nipping at our heels to continue working rooms. This is a good example here. They had started pulling up the floor in the rotating gallery to replace, not quite realizing that we were going to be using that room for quite a long time for storage. So we ended up with these sticky and kind of slippery areas in some places where the floor had been removed, and we ended up eventually having to put down carpet squares that we could kind of leapfrog to at sometimes to get through and stay safe there. And as we were emptying stuff from the rooms down the hallway, they were taking shelves down behind us and bringing the shelves out. So we were kind of on top of each other at some point. So that was one thing that we were dealing with. Another thing was that first weekend when it all happened, a lot of our tables that we would normally have were out being used by another organization that was bringing them back in a few days, but unfortunately we didn't have them right when we needed them. We were fortunate that the Fairgrounds was able to lend us about 45 tables of their own that they usually use out at the flea market out at the Fairgrounds. So they brought us the tables, and we were able to quickly put those out and use those to help lay out and dry items. But the problem was that they needed those tables back within about the first 2 weeks of everything happening. So not only we had to rehandle those items to move them again and switch them out with our own tables later. So that was a little bit stressful, and it led to a little more handling than we should have had. And just like in this year, when we are all wondering when things will return to normal, there was a lot in the board and staff and volunteers that were wanting to continue doing things as we normally do. Which is very understandable. And so there was pressure to do some of the things that we normally do, like our normal exhibit out at the Fairgrounds. So we moved forward with what we would normally do to bring stuff out to do a major week-long exhibit at the Fairgrounds, and with the help of curatorial staff and board members and other people, we were able to continue with that to move things like our International Harvester truck from the museum out to the Fairgrounds. One of the things that I normally do in the summer is kids programs on Saturday. When we tried to get the museum open by June to coincide with the opening of the farmers market. So I didn't start right away, but I tried to return to us doing some kids programming. We couldn't use the space we would normally use because it was full of collections, but we were able to do some kids programming in the lobby. But that was, pressure to, again, make sure the lobby was clear, and again, on me to make sure we could do those programs still. Another thing, we had a feature table at our local bank, which was great exposure, but also another thing that was on us that we probably should have just said no to. And so we're able to focus more on what we needed to do. And then we had our own events, the Wizards Ball, which is admittedly my baby. But it all put a lot of pressure to get that room. This is that big giant room you saw with all of the collections in it. We needed to have that room emptied by the middle of September so that they could redo the carpet, because the event was at the beginning of October. So we were able to get it all done, and we managed, but it would have been nice if we didn't have the pressure to get things ready and open for these events. Other big events that we had at the end of the year is we always have our annual meeting dinner, and Santa Land is in there in December. So there was a lot of big ticket things going on at the end of the year that made it so we had to get that room empty a lot quicker than we necessarily would have liked. And another thing that affected a lot of people last year was the tornadoes that hit in the Dayton area and throughout. So that was something that took off our contractors that had come to work with us for disasters, because that's what they do. They work with people during disasters. So they were pulled off to work on those other, admittedly much more pressing issues. So there was several weeks where work completely stopped in our collections and archives and area. We didn't have workers because they were elsewhere. So for those were times when, you know, we decided to catch up on our scanning of those damaged accessions records and things like that. I also wanted to mention Virginia had noted that last year what seemed to be a year of unprecedented disasters, natural disasters and things like that. I remember at the beginning of April, I was at the Ohio Museums Association conference, and you could see during one of the sessions where everybody was finding out what was going on with Notre Dame and the fire there. And I remember thinking, and we were all discussing amongst ourselves, what a terrible disaster to a historic building. We couldn't imagine something like that happening to our own buildings. And then I remember getting to the end of April and thinking back to, oh my gosh, I can't believe it happened to us. So that was a moment where we realized how much disasters can affect us. So other unexpected issues that we dealt with was we know we had a lot of supplies lost, and while we were in that period where we couldn't do work, the supplies started arriving at that point. And up until that point, as Virginia had mentioned, we'd been wrapping artifacts in unbleached muslin, and we're using those acidic moving boxes. So we were thrilled to have all of these new supplies, but as you can see from this picture here, we had a lot of supplies. We had crates and crates of supplies, boxes, and more tissue, all sorts of stuff. Luckily, the insurance had covered the water damage and the supplies. The downside was that we had to estimate how much we needed and order them all at once because the insurance wanted to be able to wrap things up and close the case. So we ended up getting all of our supplies over the period of a few weeks, and we had to figure out exactly where we could store those. So while we're still trying to deal with everything else, we were trying to figure out where we could find storage for these many supplies. We had some unaddressed problems that we still haven't quite properly addressed. We knew that the water had made it down to the basement, but it wasn't in our immediate vicinity of what we were dealing with because the other issues were much more pressing on the second floor. And by the time within that first night, they had removed a lot of the water from the building. So I know myself and Virginia, we never really saw the water, standing water in the that was down in the basement. Later, I had noticed, found a stack of boxes where water had come down the wall, and we were able to replace those, but this was almost 6 months later. So what was in there had dried, luckily not molded, but we were able to replace those boxes. But we do know that there's still some stuff that we probably should check for some water damage, but we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to deal with it at this time, like these flattened blueprints that we believe must have gotten hit because of where they were next to other things. And there's still some remaining boxes in the basement that haven't been able to come back up yet. So those are some things we still have to deal with that we'll get to at some point. And Virginia is gonna talk a little bit about some overarching things to remember when dealing with things like this.
Well, as as Natalie said when she started, you've got your plan, but you've also got this problem. And so remember in your plan all the things that you worked out and you thought about. But when it comes to the problem in hand, you may have to look at it differently. You may have to pull different resources. You're going to have to analyze it the best you can and act accordingly. Do your work, but work the problem. Stay calm. It really does help. It helps your volunteers. It helps other staff. I asked a volunteer about 2 weeks into the project how she was doing, and she said, "I'm fine." You were calm, and so was I, which was encouraging because I thought I was running around like crazy. But if you stay calm, other people will as well. Do what you can to communicate with each other. I put up signs right away that first night, and that did help. Do some quick meetings. There were times when there were all 3 curators around, and we said, okay, this is meeting time. What do we need to know from each other? Do whatever you can, a quick text message, especially when people look stressed. And remember, you have to sleep sometimes, so communicate in as many ways as you possibly can. Be patient. As you've already seen, there were some things that were completely out of our control. Who knew that there would be 19 tornadoes in the Dayton area, and that people would need much more than we needed, those contractors to do their job to get folks back in their houses. So be patient. Some things might not work the way you expected. Try to reduce the stress. And if you are the one who is in charge, then, you know, start watching your volunteers and your staff people. Look at them and say, okay, time for you to go out and breathe. See you in 10 minutes, and provide things, as we said, some lunch, some food, some breaks. They help everybody. And don't think you can't get away. We all took time off. All 3 curators took some time off during the disaster just to get away for a little while, and it helps a whole lot. Remember, time is not on your side. If you have wet things, get them out of boxes, get them drying, dry them off, do what you can as quickly as you can to mitigate your disaster, but also at the same time, monitor your volunteers, because even the ones who have been helping you may have never had to move artifacts and may not understand how delicate they are, how many things may be sticking out that could catch on something. And the shock and the stress may cause them to move too quickly and can lead to rough handling. So just keep an eye on your volunteers. This is new to them as well. Finally, keep looking forward. What do you want things to look like in the end? Where do you want to go? What problems do you want to solve that you thought, gee, if I could do it differently, I wouldn't do it this way? Well, now's your chance. This may be it to make those changes that you've always wanted to do. Thank you.
Now we're happy to take your questions or comments, and I believe you can, if you have them in the chat, and we're happy to answer questions.
Yep, I think that went well.